as I said, my name is Catherine Burns, and I work in the Department of Rural and Community Development, and I am responsible for this fund, Community Centres Investment Fund. So I'll take you now through today's agenda. The first thing we'll have is a video introduction by Minister Heather Humphreys. I will then give you an overview of the Community Centres Investment Fund. Then I will hand over to my colleague Majella, who will go through the whole registration and the online application process. Then Rosie will give a presentation on eligibility, preparing your application, and how the applications will be assessed. And Michael will provide a presentation in relation to the financial management. And finally, we will hold a question and answer session. So that is the rundown for the day. So Darryl, I might ask you to start with the video, please.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today for the first of our information sessions on the government's new €15 million Community Centres Investment Fund. And I understand that over 500 people have registered for today's event, which is all about giving you the information you need as you prepare your grant application to my Department of Rural and Community Development. Community centres are at the heart of nearly every community in Ireland, be it urban or rural. They are a place for people of all ages to meet, to socialise, to play sport or engage in activities ranging from a game of cards to music, arts or drama. But I know that many of our community centres are in real need of investment, upgrade or repair. This new €15 million fund will deliver grants ranging from €10,000 to €300,000 so that you can carry out those important improvements. Today you will hear about the process and what you need to do to make a good application. And as Minister, I'm encouraging you to look at this fund and think about how you can use it to improve your own local parish hall or community centre. And I really hope this fund helps communities to bounce back from the pandemic and bring life back to their local community centre. And while this particular fund is about improving existing centres, in the coming weeks I will open applications under Town and Village Renewal Scheme, which will provide for the purchase of new buildings that could be turned into community centres. I wish any group who applies every success. If there's anything else you need after today, we'll be giving you the contact details to submit follow-up questions. Go Mille Mahagiv, go Lair.
Now, I will actually give you an overview of the Community Centres Investment Fund. So just my slides will be up in one moment. And so I'm just going to start our community centres. What are our community centres? Our community centres is where we socialise, we learn and we access key services. They're there. The community centre is the centre of every village, town and city. It pulls the whole community together, it unites the community. It provides places for people to volunteer in. The community centre can be the centre that people come together to work in community projects within your own community. It's also a place that shares information, and especially our new citizens that are coming to the country now, like the community centre is some place to go and to see what's available, what's going on, what services are there. It's involved in all different health promotion things, 5Ks. It's all about bringing the community together so that we can socialise, we can learn, and we can access the key services. So this fund, so we need to refresh this fund. So it might just next slide there. But this fund is important because this fund is about refreshing our community centres. As I said there, we have brilliant community centres in our cities, our towns and rural areas, but it has been a long time since they have been modernized. And the thing is, we need to bring our community centres back to be the centre of the community. So this is what this fund is all about. And during 2020 and 2021 with COVID-19, a lot of our community centres was closed for long periods of time. And when the people went back in, the community centre is badly in need of being upgraded and refurbished. And as we have moved away from post-COVID times, we now want to put the community centre back in the centre of the community again, and that it can provide supports and benefits for everybody, that the community centre comes back in to be the centre of every, as I said at the beginning, village, town and city. And that is what the whole thing about this fund is, to bring our community centres back in. This, as I said, is a 15 million catchable fund, and it's all about refreshing and upgrading and refurbishing of our community centres and our community buildings. And this fund covers all of the country, urban and rural. So the whole country is eligible for this scheme. And so that's why it's so good that today we can get that you see and look at your community centre and see what you could do to bring it back to life. What is this new fund covers? What kind of funding? But this, as I say, is all about looking at your community centre and seeing what you can do to upgrade it. And one of the things will be communal facilities, like the kitchen in a community centre, the toilet facilities in a community centre. You could also energy retrofitting, new doors, new window, new heating systems. As I said, they were closed for so long in 2020 and 2021, and they need to be refreshed and revamped. A lot of older community centres have, stages in them, and they have lighting systems, and the stages where there's funding could be provided for those that would for just that you could put the local tobacco society could use it, that bringing light back, bringing entertainment back into your community centre. So the funding could be used to upgrading the present lighting system, upgrade the stage, get events happening back in your community centre again. It also can be used to address safety concerns, that you need to get, so your community centre is a safe place. You might need to get wiring updated, access. Also improves disability access. The whole thing is that it's improvements to assist in providing additional and better services to the community, such as meals for elderly and youth. It's all about, just think about your community centre and see what could we do to the community centre so we get all the people in the community back using the community centre again, and what does it need to do to be refreshed, and as well to develop community centres as social hubs, and that's through the development of the communities, as I said, the cinema, the stages, get them all back, youth hubs, any community library where the local book club could use your community centre to meet, and if it only meant putting in a few bookshelves that people could drop books off, could pick books up. It's all about bringing our community centre back to be the centre of every community. It's where you go to meet people, social, and our community centres is for every age group. So everyone can go to the community centre. In the community centre, everyone should be able to, whether it's the elderly or the young, can all be all together in the one place. And the other thing, as I said at the beginning there, as a lot of community centres, there needs essential maintenance works, and like your roof repairs, your painting. So it's just a thing with 25,000, what you could do to your community centre, what you could do with just that amount of money, what you could actually do with your community centre. So then, so as I said there, what the aim of the fund, what grants is actually available under this fund. This fund is to deliver high quality cashable projects for community centres that benefits your community. The grants available are category 1, the small scale projects, the improvements to the centre. These range from 10,000 to 25,000. So just think about your community centre, what you could do with 10,000 to 25,000 in it. Category 2 is larger scale projects, and that's from 25,001 to 100,000. And the third category is major projects, which is from 100,000 to 300,000. So who can apply for this community centre fund? Applicants must be not-for-profit, community, charities, and the voluntary sector organisation. What is the definition of a community centre? A community centre is a building that is community owned and is principally used for community activities, events, recreation. It can be premises where groups use the facilities within it, such as the kitchen, the hall, the meeting room. It's all about that everybody can use the community centre. They are open to the public and a place where people can gather for group activities, support, public information, and any other purpose whatsoever. So it's your community centre is there for everybody to use and for everybody and to become the centre again of a community. The next steps, as I said, we said there again, the guidelines, the sample application forms, and the Q&A are all available at that website there, www.gov.ie. The application process opens on the 7th of June. The closing date is Thursday, the 14th of July. Applicants must register on the portal in advance of submitting the application. Nigella will go through all this with you in the next presentation. And as I said, all queries can be sent to the DRCD mailbox, which is ccif@drcd.gov.ie. You will see that link numerous times during the
Hi everyone. So I'm going to take you through the registration process for the Community Centres Investment Fund port. So find the link on where to access the portal to register. So just to let you know that the portal will be down for maintenance tomorrow between 2 and about 8 o'clock. But you'll be able to register before and after. Next slide, Darrell, thanks. So the first step on registering is you must register a primary authorised user. The primary authorised user must be a member of your board or a member of your committee. Essentially, that's the person who will have access to sign the contract if your organisation is successful in one of the grants that you apply for. So when you go on to the portal page, you'll click register, and then you'll be asked to fill in your primary authorised user will be asked to fill in these details. They must choose the role, the appropriate role, whether it's a board member or whether it's a treasurer or chairperson, and then the user type, primary authorised user. Make sure you read the privacy notice and the user guidelines as well. Then you will come onto the organisation page. So you have two options here. If you've never held a contract with Pobal before, you will onboard a new organisation and you will be asked to fill in some organisational information. If you have a contract with Pobal for another programme previously and you already have login details, then you will just use the existing organisation section. You will input your unique reference number, which will be on any Pobal documentation that you would receive, and then your onboarding code. If you don't have an onboarding code, you can get it emailed to you using the button on this screen. If you have any issues with any of this, please email support and we will help you out. So when you go on to the onboard your organisation, we'll be asking you for your legal name, your group legal structure, your tax registration number. It's really important that you have a tax reference number and you input it at this stage. If you don't have one, you will have to apply for one. If you are going to be successful with this grant and you're going to be receiving a payment, you'll have to have a tax reference number. If you are a branch of a national organisation, you will be able to use their tax reference number, that's fine. If you're in that situation, or if you don't have a tax reference number yet, you can contact online support at pobal.ie and we'll give you a number for the purposes of the registration. Next slide. So once you've completed that process and filled in all of your information, you will get an email, you'll get a verification email. So you'll get an email, you have to click in that link within 72 hours. And then that will verify your account, and then you can go on to the next step. So when you get to the next step, you'll be confirming that you're going to be the primary authorised user. If you already have a primary authorised user set up, but they've moved on, you can choose to replace that person. If you're completely new, you will just fill out these board member details. So you need to be really sure that the email address that you're inputting at this point is correct, because we can't change it once this is submitted. We don't have the opportunity to change it anymore. It has to be ideally 2 unique board or committee members, that the details that you input there, but we will accept your own, the primary authorized user's details, and 1 other board or committee member. So once that's completed, the board members will get an email asking them to sign off on the primary authorized user application. You will have very limited access on the portal until that's completed. The board member will get that email, they'll put in their signature, and then that's completed. We review it even before that happens, and the primary authorized user will get an email confirming that they have full access to the portal. As I said, make sure the email addresses are correct, otherwise it all kind of stalls. Up to Tuesday, so the 7th of June, so the next slide, Daryl, thanks. Up to Tuesday, once you've all that done, you will get this top page. You'll just get select program. So you won't be able to go any further, and that's completely okay. On Tuesday, you will then be able to see the Community Centres Investment Fund option on the bottom. You'll click that and you'll go into the funding section, and there you will see the application form. Or if you want to add additional users who are going to be creating the application form or are going to be editing the application form, a video will be available on the DRCD website to kind of take you through the steps on how to do that. If you have any issues with doing any of this, or if you have any problems, just email support and we will help you through that process. Thank you very much, and I'm going to pass you on to Roisin now.
Thank you, Nadella, and just once again, thank you so much to everyone for attending today and for your attention so far. I know that a lot of you are already busy asking questions in the chat function, which is great to see, and some of them David is furiously getting to, which is great. Some of them will hopefully be answered over the course of our presentations, and others we might be answering there during the Q&A at the end. But if not, the opportunity will still be there to contact us with questions afterwards. So Catherine had gone through an overview of the fund, and she spoke about the kinds of organisations that are eligible to apply and gave us a flavour of the types of activities that this fund seeks to support. I'm going to talk to you in a little bit more detail about the kinds of organisations and activities that are and are not eligible for funding. And after that, I'm going to go through a few tips for the application process, and finally how applications are assessed. So in relation to eligibility, there is, of course, as we keep saying, more information available on the CCIF web page, on the application guidelines, and in the questions and answers document also. So these are not exhaustive lists. It's really just to give you kind of an indicative idea for the moment. So in terms of eligibility and eligible organisations, this is a fund targeted at the non-for-profit sector. So it is generally for community and voluntary organisations. They may or may not be registered charities, but generally it is for not-for-profit organisations. It is targeted at centres, community centres, which are in line with the definition that Catherine mentioned at the beginning, and I'm going to keep mentioning that definition of community centre that we use for the purpose of this fund. And these are centres that can show that they're used by a broad range of people in the community that's local to the centre. For category 1 funding, so Catherine brought you through the 3 different categories. So category 1 is for funding between 10 and 25,000 euro. An organisation needs to have its own committee, a governing document, so that might be a constitution or memorandum and articles of association, and its own accounts. Now, if that is, for example, an unincorporated association, so an organisation that doesn't have a legal status, for category 1, that's okay. They can still apply, and they might not have, say, an externally audited set of accounts like an annual financial statement, but there might be, say, a profit and loss statement or another form of accounts for the most recent period. So we would ask that it is required that they would be submitted with the application form. For funding under categories 2 and 3, organisations seeking to apply would need to have a legal status. So that would be, for example, they might be incorporated, they might be a company limited by guarantee, There might be a registered charity. Now, Angela touched on the idea of, say, a parent organisation and branches, and this has come up a lot in our questions. So something that's come up a lot, and I see it's come up in the chat as well today, is let's say there is a diocese and various community centres in that diocese are a parish hall owned by the diocese. So yes, they can apply. When we ask for, I'll speak in a minute about ownership and how you prove either ownership or the leasing arrangement, that communication from the diocese is sufficient. But let's take an example where there's one diocese and several parishes within that are seeking to apply for this fund. If a parish has its own parish committee with its own governing document and its own set of accounts, it can apply in its own right for Category 1 funding. And multiple parishes within one diocese can make applications as separate entities in and of themselves to Category 1. If a parent organisation, so we'll use the diocese here as the example, want to make an application on behalf of a parish, that's acceptable too, as long as the parish hall itself, the centre itself, meets the definition that it relates to this fund, and in all other ways the eligibility requirements are met. But it's important to note that any organisation can only make one application for one grant under one category. So if a parent organisation, and the same would go for, say, a national organisation with affiliates and branches around the country, or regional organisations with a few different branches, if the parent organisation, and I'm using that as a very general term, want to make an application on behalf of an affiliate organisation, they can do that, but they can only do it once. So they might have quite a few that want to apply. If they want to make an application for a few different centres, so let's say one organisation manages multiple centres, then they can do that. So they can say, okay, we want to get new tables and chairs for 3 different centres, and they can put that into one application, and as long as the centres themselves in question meet all the other criteria mentioned. However, that is only acceptable for Category 1 funding. So if you're looking for funding under Category 2 or Category 3, then the application has to be for one centre only. Okay, so there, if you wouldn't mind moving on. So in terms of providing evidence of eligibility, any organisation seeking funding for a project that requires planning permission will need to submit evidence that that planning permission is in place. Now, ideally, that would be planning permission that has already been approved, so evidence that the planning permission has been approved and granted, and that can be evidence through, for example, that confirmation from the local authority. What we will accept as well is, let's say you have a project at the moment in train that you have been in the process of seeking planning permission for, and you make a submission before the application deadline, well, before you are submitting your application. So let's say you're submitting your application on the 11th of July. As long as you have sought planning permission and you have the stamped evidence from the local authority that your submission is in before the date that you're applying, we will accept that. But I suppose bear in mind later on when I talk about selection criteria, we will be taking into consideration the achievability of a project. We're going to be looking at the projects that are shovel ready, that are ready to go. So if at all possible, really we're looking for the ones where the planning permission is there already. If it is the case that you are seeking planning permission and you are seeking funding for a project pending planning permission, if you were successful, you will be notified that your project has been successful and recommended for funding. However, the awarding of the grant will be conditional on your planning permission having been approved in the interim. So let's say you find out in Q4 of this year, okay, that's great. I've been recommended for funding. I can draw down this grant. That grant cannot be drawn down unless you have the planning permission that you had said you were seeking at the time of application. If it was refused, or if it's still in train, or there's an appeals process, then unfortunately we would not be able at that time to continue on with the process. Again, so we had a lot of questions around, say, ownership. So a lot of community centres are owned by, say, the local authority, and community might have a lease or rental agreement or management agreement in place, or there might just be a long-term usage policy or agreement there in place with the diocese or the local authority or another body. So that is fine. In any case, what we would need is evidence that there is a rental agreement or lease or management agreement or some sort of arrangement in place for minimum number of years depending on the category you're looking for. So they're outlined there. So if it's category 1, 5 years, 20 years this is from the time that your project would have been completed. So 20 years for category 2 and 25 for category 3. If some people have asked, okay, we don't have a lease that will say we have, you know, that we're leasing the building or that we're renting the building for the number of years in question, but we can get a letter. We can get a headed letter from, say, the local authority or the diocese. Then that is fine if that letter outlines the situation that is in place, and that a letter of, say, comfort guaranteeing that that situation will remain in place for the time specified relating to the category to which you're applying, then that's fine. But in any case, whatever, if you yourself, your organization don't own your own building and you are renting it or leasing it, then there would need to be permission from the building owner. And again, we'll accept that in the form of a letter, that if you are successful for funding and your project is going ahead, that they give the permission for the work to be done. And then furthermore, then for categories 2 and 3, the organization will need to prove that they have 5% match funding. So that means if you're applying for €100,000, then there would need to be €5,000 that the organization will put towards the project cost outlined. And Michael will speak to you in the next part about what would be accepted as evidence for that. So in terms of the types of organizations or activities that would not be eligible for funding under this grant, I suppose an important thing to think of here is generally this is because there already is funding out there for these different organizations and situations. This is a grant targeted at the community and voluntary sector, so it is not available to private individuals or trusts, to for-profit companies and commercial entities or foundations. We have had quite a few queries from, say, community enterprise centres, community childcare facilities and schools. So there could sometimes be community enterprise centres or childcare facilities based within a community centre. And they have asked, and I saw somebody ask today as well, if they would be eligible for funding to make improvements to their centre, to their facilities under this grant. So the community childcare facility itself, the board of that facility, or the board managing the community enterprise centre would not be eligible to apply. However, if what is required is some type of improvement or works that would be for the overall centre and used by the whole community. So let's say a community childcare facility is in one part of a centre, but there is a need to replace windows or disability access or the kitchen, that would be used and benefited and would benefit the entire community, then the committee responsible for managing the centre can apply for funding to do that, as opposed to it being something that would only benefit the childcare facility or only benefit the community enterprise centre. Schools then as well, so a lot of the time a community centre is located as part of a school or attached to a school or within a school, and it's used by both maybe the school during the day and the rest of the community at night. So once the community centre meets the definition of community centre that has already been outlined there, and it has its own management committee who are responsible for the centre as opposed to having, anything to do with the school, then that committee can apply for a fund to make improvements that will benefit the whole community in that centre that's attached to the school. The school itself would not be eligible to apply. Statutory bodies are not eligible. They might support an application of a community group, however. Sports facilities as well. So we've had quite a few people say our community centre, our local community centre happens to be the GAA hall. GAA own that centre, but that it is used by the entire community. So if the centre, again, meets the definition, it's open to the public, it's used by a broad range of people throughout the community, it's not a closed shop just for members, then that might be considered for funding. However, the project to be funded would have to be for something that would be in benefit the entire community, enjoyed by the whole community, and not be, say, a sporting item. So if it was sporting equipment, like indoor hurleys or a climbing wall, then that would not be eligible. And do use, and that can be demonstrated, then that is something we take into consideration. Outdoor facilities, so people have asked about playgrounds and car parks and that kind of thing, are not. This is really focusing on on the building itself of the community centre. So I mentioned earlier that under category 1, one organisation responsible for multiple centres can make an application for small scale improvements to those centres within one application. That is limited to category 1. For category 2 or category 3, again, it must be for one centre only. New build projects are not covered under this grant, so it is focusing, as Catherine said, on refurbishing and revitalising the existing stock of community centres around the country. And then finally, work more suitably funded from another public source. So a lot of organisations have, it's fantastic, they've secured funding through, say, the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, or through LEADER, or through other sources. And let's use the energy example for the moment. So let's say you want to do an energy retrofitting project and you had the funding already to do, say, the windows, but now perhaps it would make sense to do the door while you're doing the windows, but you didn't have the funding before for that. So as long as you can demonstrate that what you're seeking funding for under this application is not already funded from another source, then that can be considered for funding under this. So just make sure that, well, when you're talking about the capacity of your organisation to manage funding, and that you have managed multiple funds in the past, perhaps, or that you know the capacity is there to do that because you have certain parameters in place to make sure that if you're successful, you will delineate between the funding from this source and the funding from other sources, and it will always be clear what is being funded by what. Like, really, we're obviously looking to avoid duplication of public funding and get the best value for money from the exchequer for this. Okay, so that is a lot on eligibility. I'm sure there's still plenty more questions on it, which we'll hopefully get to a bit of them in the end. Now I'd just like to take you through a few kind of tips and things to think about, considerations for when you are preparing your application. So before you do apply, really just have a really good look at the application guidelines. You're obviously here today, so that's a huge amount of preparation that you're doing. Really closely read the information that's there, and also in the frequently asked questions document around eligibility and around the selection criteria that I'll talk about in a minute. Also think about the categories of funding. So let's say the board, you're sitting down, you're thinking, okay, we're going to apply for something from this grant. I'm sure everyone has a list, the length of their arm, of things that need to be done to their centre, of things, if we had the funding, we'd do this and this and this. Really think about, okay, what of the projects that we could potentially do are the best fit for this fund, for the aims of this fund, and for that are aligned with the kind of sample activities we've been given there as the kind of things this fund is looking to support. And if you're on the fence between, okay, will we go for category 1, will we go for category 2 or more, think about early on in the application guidelines that outline the number of grants that it is anticipated will be funded under each category, that number of grants that will be awarded into each category. There are a lot more grants to be granted or to be awarded under category 1 than under the other categories, and this is a fund that we expect to be heavily oversubscribed and competitive. So have a think about that, and if you are on the fence between category 1 or category 2, then maybe think about, okay, well, what is our likelihood of being awarded a grant, should we apply under each of these categories? So when it comes to thinking about your application and preparing it, again, think about the aim of the fund and the criteria, and then think about the information that's requested. So once you've registered and done all of the stuff that Nigella has said there, because you've decided that this is the fund for you and you're going to apply, then from the 7th of June, you'll see an online application form. But between now and then, you can, right now, today, you can go on the gov.ie webpage for this programme, for CCIF, and you can see a sample application form. So you can already see the types of questions that are in there and the information that is required in terms of like extra documents you might have to submit and that kind of thing. So it's a good idea to make a checklist for yourself or for or with whoever it is that's going to be responsible for putting this application together of the kind of information you'll need. So at a glance, it might seem like, yeah, we know that, we have that, but actually you might have to go routing, you might have to ask someone, you might have to go and find certain documents. So if you make a list now, and make a bit of a plan for, okay, who's going to gather what, then it can make it easier for you as you're going along to see and not get overwhelmed by how much information you have to provide all at once. As a board or committee, come together and decide in a really succinct way, okay, what is the project that we are putting forward? What is it that we're proposing for funding here? And make sure it's easy for you to describe even amongst yourselves and to each other before you start putting it together for an application for funding. So just to note, there are two areas where priority will be given when applications are being assessed for this fund. So one of those is community centres that are providing services and supporting people in an area experiencing disadvantage or people experiencing marginalisation, disadvantage, social exclusion. And also organisations that have demonstrated that the people who will ultimately be benefiting from this improvement to their centre have been consulted, that they've been involved in designing the project you're proposing, they might be involved in delivering it as well. So if that is the case, demonstrate that and show us that through your answers in the application form and any other supporting document that might back that up. Now, next slide, please, Darryl. So when it comes to writing your application, make sure that you're thinking about it from an external point of view. So assume that the reader doesn't know anything about your organisation. I see somebody there commented on our use of jargon on this, and I apologize for that. So I will ask here that people use simple language and avoid jargon, and that, let's say, for example, if they're using an acronym, that the first time you'll say frequently asked questions, and after that you'd say FAQ. And if there's anything local to your community that you think an external reader might not understand, then think about, okay, how could I phrase this or explain it in a way that makes sense to the external reader? And be really, really clear on the basics of how the funding will make necessary improvements to better serve the community. So keep coming back to that. That is the most important thing to demonstrate. And all of these things, I always find, take lots and lots of time. So do not underestimate how delayed the process can be by that one piece of information or that one document that you need or that one answer you need back from someone. Allow yourself plenty of time. If you think you're going to be applying for this fund, get started, because it can all take time. So on the actual form itself, it is an online form, and like I said, you won't see it now. So if you have registered and followed the instructions that Magella was saying there already, or if you were already registered on this portal because you might already have a fund that's administrated via Public, then that's great, you have a login, but maybe definitely between now and the 7th of June, go in, log in, log out, log in, log out, make sure it works for yourself. And from the 7th of June, you'll be able to see the application form. It won't be there today, it won't be there until the 7th of June. So when you go in on the 7th of June and you see it there, you can get started, and straight away it is in draft. So while it's in draft, you can go in, you can edit you can edit any text, you can delete, you can add documents, you can remove documents that you've uploaded. Regularly save your work. Please, 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 save. So as you're going along, you can hit save and exit. That will bring you out of the system. Don't panic. You can go back in and pick up where you left off. Or as you're going along page by page, you can hit save and continue, move on to the next page, and so on. It might be the case that a few different people are responsible for the application form. So if that's the case, it would probably be easier to work on something offline or on a different platform. So it might be that you're using a Google platform or OneDrive or just a shared Word document that you're emailing around to each other or whatever. If you are doing this though, have taken down over each question the character limit. So I think for almost all the text boxes, if not all the text boxes, there is a character limit of 2,000 characters. So that's not 2,000 words, that's 2,000 characters, which really isn't an awful lot. So you might find, okay, loads of people have been editing this, and now I've got great descriptions and I know exactly what I'm going to answer to each question. But then when someone goes to copy and paste into the online application form, it's too long and they'll have to cut and everyone's time has been wasted. So make sure that from the beginning, you're paying attention to those character limits. Once you have hit submit, that's it then, it's in, there's no more editing it, there's no more uploading any additional documents or removing anything that you've already uploaded. And similarly, if because of this, you want to leave it in draft for a bit, that's okay, but make sure that before, and I mean before the deadline, you go back and hit submit. So you might be 99.9% there, and you just want to go back in and add one more document, or you want another person to have a second pair of eyes look at it, or you want to have one last read of it before you hit submit. That's fine. But if you do that, I don't know, set a reminder on your phone or something in your Outlook calendar, or tie a ribbon around your finger, or whatever it is, don't forget to go back in and move it to submit, so that you don't lose your or sorry, it's not even that it would be lost, it's that it would be in draft, and if it's still in draft past the deadline, we would not be able to consider it. So please regularly save and don't forget to submit. So right up until the closing date, there'll be support available on the email address that has already been mentioned and is there on the screen. And also we're going to have online meetings. So these will be support clinics between the date that the application goes live and the closing date. So these will be like this, they'll be using this platform, but they'll be interactive. So you'll be able to come in, raise your hand, ask questions. We'll go through the application form step by step in more detail. And it will hopefully clear any more questions you have after you have already gone through all the guidance, gone through any instructional videos that are there, and had a good kind of look and read through and stab at the application form. The dates for those are actually already on the CCIF web page, and you'll be able to register for them from next Tuesday, from the 7th of June, when the application goes live. So now briefly, I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of information around how applications are assessed. So we have 4 selection criteria. So these are 4 areas under which your application will be considered in order to establish an overall score that will determine whether or not it's recommended for funding. So I'm going to go straight into demonstration of need. This is the next one. So what we're looking for here is that you have shown the extent to which the work that you're proposing are needed, and that the people who ultimately be benefiting from them have had a say and have identified that need. You know, that it's not just coming from the committee, that you know that need has been established and identified by the people who will be ultimately using the improved facility. 1/3 of this score will be decided by the categorization of the area served by your community centre within the deprivation index. Now, I'm sure a lot of you won't be familiar with the deprivation index, so I'm not going to go through the whole platform step by step, but I'll just bring your attention to where you can find the information. So if you search Public Maps deprivation index, or if you just type into your browser maps.hubble.ie, so Darrell, if you would mind bringing up that next slide, please, then that will bring you to this homepage, Hubble Maps, and on the top right hand corner you can select maps, and down below that you can select deprivation. So that will bring you into a page that will look a bit like Google Maps really, and to the right you have what's called a layer list, and what you want to look at is 2016 by ED, so that's by electoral district. The reason it says 2016 is because it's using our last census data. And then the map will turn into these colors that you see here. So you can search the address of your community centre, or you can scroll in like you would on Google Maps, whichever, to find the categorization on the deprivation index. Now, we'll be searching these ourselves using your air code, so you don't need to provide it as a part of your form. However, it's not a bad idea to speak to it, maybe to have a look, familiarize yourself with what it is, and to include that in your answer in your application form. And there are videos on Public Maps as well, so they'll explain a bit more about how you can find what you're looking for there. So need was 30% of your overall score. Value for money and achievability are each 30% as well. So under value for money, what we're looking for is that you've really thought about your budget, that you've given sufficient detail. If you're putting in one budget line that's for a very high amount, then make sure that the level of detail and supporting evidence you give is proportionate with that. And Michael will talk about this in more detail as well. that you are that your budget is complete as well, so that you have accounted for the overall cost within each of your budget lines, and that each of the budget lines is relevant to the work that you are proposing. And overall, it's looking at the difference that your proposed project will make to the community, to everyone in the community, and particularly to those most marginalized. So the better you communicate that to us, the better we can evaluate value for money, taking that into consideration. Achievability and viability is another 30%. So again, think shovel ready if it's a project involving any sort of construction. So again, like I mentioned there before, if you require planning permission, then make sure that you definitely will need to have something in place, either the planning permission itself or the submission for it. If you are sure that it doesn't need planning permission, maybe double check with your local authority just to be sure. If there's anything else that you can submit to us to evidence that the project that you are proposing is absolutely ready to go for a successful for funding, that is the kind of thing we're looking for here to make sure that this is an achievable project. Think about how the project is going to be overseen and call out any risks. So if you are thinking out, okay, there are some risks to this project, but I'm not going to talk about them in the application form, please name anything that you would see as a risk, but also name what it is that your committee proposed to do to mitigate against that risk. And thinking about the time frame, the budget, I know at the moment there's a lot of talk about inflation, and Michael will speak to that again as well. Think about, have you built in contingency, and have you communicated as well as you can how it is that your organization will make this an achievable and viable project. And then finally, governance is worth 10% of the overall score. So what we're looking at here is the capacity of the board or the committees that will ultimately be responsible for overseeing this project. How regularly they meet, how much experience they might have of managing public funding in the past. And all of that, again, is taken into consideration in proportion to the level of funding that you are seeking. So I'm going to hand you over now to Michael for the financial management section of both applying for this grant and managing the funding to be successful. Thank you.
Thanks, Roisin, very much for that. And hello, everybody. And my name is Michael Sheridan. And for my part of this presentation, I hope to introduce you to some of the key financial information that you need to consider for the CCIF programme at the application stage and during the rollout of the programme. So we could move to slide 2, please. So the first part that I'm going to start with is in relation to what type of costs are eligible for funding. As outlined by Catherine earlier, this is a capital grant for the purpose of allowing improvement and to enhance your centre for the benefit of your local community. On pages 7 and 8 of the guideline document, you will find details of the types of work you might be considering to complete and the related costs that are eligible. So examples of this could include that you're going to undertake a building or renovation works on your centre. This could be a small extension. It could be a refurbishment to part of your building, like your hall, or it could be an upgrade to your changing rooms or toilet areas, or it could be to improve mobility access to the centre by pushing in ramps and rails. The grant also covers the acquisition and installation or replacement of key equipment. This could include the kitchen equipment that you use, your fire and safety equipment like new fire alarms or fire doors, or it could include putting in a new lighting system like LED lights with sensors to turn off the lights when no one is in the room. The grant also covers upgrade works on your electrical, gas and heat appliances to ensure you're meeting with regulations and current standards. The grant also allows you to purchase and cover the installation cost of outdoor lighting and costs that might be involved in improving the energy efficiency of your building. These are just a few of the types of works you might be considering, and the costs to contract tradespeople that you hire to complete the work, like a tiler or an electrician, a builder or a decorator, is covered by the grant, as well as the rental cost of equipment they might need to complete the project and the building materials used. Now, in relation to Category 2 and Category 3 grantees only, professional fees for work-related service providers, that would mean like an engineer, an architect, or a quantity surveyor fee, are eligible up to a limit of 10% of the total cost of the project. So key points to remember regarding the costs that you are deciding to apply for. They must relate directly to the project that you plan to complete on your centre and which you will outline in the application, as Roisin has said. And also remember, these costs, they must be actual or real costs. So what does that actually mean? That means they actually have to be paid to a third party, which can be subsequently verified by an invoice, a payment from your bank or credit union, and that you've completed procurement on. So now can we move to the next slide? Because while I've covered off some of the costs that are eligible, I'd like to talk to you about what types of costs that are not eligible for the funding. The basic rule for you to remember is if the costs are not capital in nature or related to the project you outline in the application form, then they are not eligible. On page 8 of the guidelines, you will see examples of these, and these can include staff time spent working on the project or related overhead costs. The purchase of land is also not allowable, and if your organisation is registered for VAT, the VAT element of the payment is not eligible. Please also remember new builds of community centres are not covered by this funding. And another final thing to remember is that the cost must be incurred during the delivery period. This will be set out in your grant agreement and will end on the 31st of January 2024. So any cost that you incur prior to the grant or after the grant is not eligible for funding. So an example of this would be architect fees that you are incurring now in the design stage. Those are not eligible for funding. As Roisin said, there is a match funding requirement for Category 2 and 3 grantees of 5%. So this basically means, say that you're applying for 200,000 in Category 3. Then the full project cost must amount to 210,000. So there's an extra 10,000, which represents 5% of the 200,000. Now, where can this matching fund come from? Well, it can come from a number of sources. Firstly, your organisation may have those funds on deposit already, and you can confirm this by providing a bank statement with the application. It may also be covered by a letter of offer or contract from another funder, which will cover part of the project being completed. And again, you provide this as part of the application. Another source of this is that you might have a loan offer from your local bank or your credit union. And again, this will suffice. But I would like to point out any loan interest or repayments that you incur on this loan are not eligible costs for the programme. Also note that in-kind benefit contributions will not be considered as match funding. So what are in-kind contributions? This is a contribution of a good or service other than money. Examples of this can include where volunteers complete some of the work at no cost to your organisation, or a local business provides the free use of equipment to you. While obviously that's very welcome and it's great that your organisation has it, it cannot be used in your application. So can we move to the next slide now? Thank you. So once you have decided on what works your centre needs to complete, the next step will be to obtain quotes from suppliers for the work. As you can see on the slide and as outlined on page 12 of the guidelines, for Category 1 applications where the cost of a product or work you want completed is more than €5,000 for each individual item, you will need one quote from a relevant supplier that has to be submitted with the application. While for Category 2 and 3 grants, you will need to submit 2 quotes. So an example of this would be, say you decide that your kitchen needs to be refurbished, so you need to get it completely updated and pull out what's there already. So that will involve you getting the new kitchen installed. It might involve getting new tiling. It will involve painting, and it could involve new kitchen equipment. If any of those individual parts of the project cost more than €5,000, which obviously probably the new kitchen will, then you need to provide one quote. What type of quotes are acceptable? Well, there's examples of this could be you get a quote directly from the contractor or supplier which is providing the service or the product to you. If you have employed technical supervisor like an engineer or a quantity surveyor, they can provide an estimate of what they anticipate the costs will be, and this will suffice. Or if you're purchasing equipment, we say like in the example of the kitchen, if you want a new cooker and fridge, a screenshot from a catalogue will also do. One piece of advice, while you're not required to submit a quote for amounts below €5,000, I would recommend that your organisation does contact the supplier of those products or works you want to complete to ensure that you're included an accurate costing in the application form. You don't want to underestimate those costs if you are successful. Now, we do understand centres have concerns regarding how high inflation and how this may affect the project that are going to be completed toward the end of this year and early next year. Projects can only be planned and funding applications made using estimates prepared by industry professionals. Your own planning process should take this into consideration and include all known factors and build contingencies into unknown variables. What I would recommend is that when you are speaking to the contractors or the suppliers, that you advise them of your time frame of when you're going to complete this work and ask them to quote prices for what they think it will be done and include that in your application. Another question that has been arising and that I've noticed in previous things is that some applicants are considering going to apply for Category 2 grants because you have a number of different projects that you want to complete. For instance, you might have a new kitchen and you have a new bathroom that you want to get updated. And the question has been arising, both those individual projects might come under 25,000, but can we just submit one quote for those work? Well, the answer is if you're applying under Category 2, you need to submit 2 quotes for each of those works because they're individual line items and individual projects. So can we move on now? I'm going to speak to you about public procurement and the requirements of that. So if we can move on to slide 5, thank you. Firstly, I want to clarify the rules I'm going to explain only apply once you have a grant awarded. It's important for your organisation to know what's required of you. Compliance with public procurement is a part of this programme and you need to familiarise yourself with it. You may ask, what is public procurement? Basic public procurement is about ensuring you're getting value for money in relation to the costs incurred with the grant and for government funding. There are 2 types of rules which apply to this grant, and the first one is on screen. The first one is in relation to goods and services. So what are these? So goods would include the purchase, we say, of kitchen equipment, new kitchen fixtures and fittings, the tiles that you would buy if you're putting into your kitchen. Well, what are the services? The services would be the hiring of an electrician that might put in new lighting services for you, or a tiler. So on screen, you can see different thresholds that you have to consider. And all these figures are net of VAT. The VAT element that you would pay on the invoice is not included for public procurement. So for amounts below 5,000, 1 or more verbal quote is required. I would recommend that you keep a written record of any conversation you have if you get a verbal quote. That would include outlining the date, the time, the supplier name, and the details of the discussion. Ideally, if this can be followed up by a written quote from the supplier, that would be better. For amounts between 5 and 25,000, a minimum of 3 written quotes have to be received and maintained. So this means you would contact 3 different suppliers and you would ask them to quote for the products you want to purchase. For payments above 25,000, you need to complete an e-tendering process. This will most likely apply only to Category 2 and 3 grantees. Can we move now to the next slide? And this is the second type of work. So this is in relation to capital and related services. And you can see the box on screen. The definition for works is any building beyond maintenance, including new buildings, extensions and refurbishment. while related services are to do with professionals supporting this process, like your architect or your engineer. So an example of works is where you would hire a builder to complete an extension or refurbishment of your centre. And this is where they provide both the labour and all the products used in the works that are done. There are two thresholds here, one below 50,000 net of VAT, where you should seek a minimum of 5 quotes from contractors, while above 50,000, you will need to complete a e-tendering process. If your organisation is using an engineer or quantitative surveyor, they will be able to advise you with this process. So if your organisation is successful in getting the grant, you will have to complete a public procurement process for the project spend. You do not need to go back to the original supplier you got a quote from at the application stage, but you will have to ensure you get quotes from a number of suppliers, evaluate them, and make a decision on which one to use. If you don't use the lowest price quote, you must very clearly document the rationale for this decision. Sometimes you don't use the lowest price quote because that person isn't available to complete the work within the time frame, and that's an acceptable reason not to use them. I know one of the questions arising is whether you need to complete an e-tendering process at the application stage, and the answer is no. Public procurement only will apply if you're awarded the grant. The final thing to remember about public procurement is if you pay a supplier over 10,000 in a 12-month period, you need to confirm their tax clearance status. This is just to confirm their tax affairs in order. So when you are looking at suppliers at the public procurement stage, please ensure you ask them if they have current tax clearance status. So further information on public procurement can be found on the website highlighted on the screen, and these links are included on page 12 of the guidelines. So now we're going to move on to the next slide, which is about preparing your budget. So now you have identified the works you want to complete, and you've got the relevant costs for the project. Your next step is to prepare your budget and identify what the total cost of the project will be and which grant you are going to apply for. There is one point to remember in relation to VAT. For the vast majority of community centres who are not registered for VAT, what I am going to say doesn't apply to you. You prepare your budget based upon the core prices you receive. However, for the minority of community centres which are registered for VAT, you must exclude any VAT payable on the quotes received from the budget, as VAT element of cost is reclaimable and not eligible for CCIF funding. As you can see on the screen, there are budget thresholds on the minimum and maximum project costs. And earlier in the presentation, Catherine set out the grant bands which are available. These are for category 1, you can get grants between 10,000 to 25,000 euros. For category 2, you can have 25,000 to 100,000 euros, while category 3 grants are covered from 100,000 to 300,000. However, as you can see on the screen, the maximum project cost in each grant category is higher than the maximum grant. You may ask, is this a mistake? It is not. It was designed to allow centres to apply for a lower grant category if your total project cost was not significantly higher than the maximum grant available, and the difference in cost can be funded from your own sources. So an example of this would be, say, you decide that you want to upgrade your changing rooms, and the total costs are 28,000. And your organisation has 3,000 to cover the cost above 25,000 euros. Then you could apply for category 1, because as Roisin pointed out, there are more opportunities for you to get funding under this category than if you applied under category 2. Again, for category 2, so the maximum project cost can be 120, and for category 3, the maximum cost is 350. Projects must not cost above 350,000, otherwise they're not eligible for funding. Now, I previously worked as a public auditor, and I've gone to a lot of auditing centres over the years, and I know financial resources for capital projects can be limited. So just to give you a bit of advice, if you're an organisation and you find yourself, you have a project coming in at around 30,000 and you don't have the extra funds to cover that, I would recommend that you go back to your suppliers and you discuss with them to see what ways you can bring down the cost so that you can apply for a category 1 grant and you can keep it within the maximum of the grant, which is 25,000. So when you're at this stage, do take time, as Roisin said, to carefully consider what grant category you're going to apply for to ensure you have more opportunities to get the funding. So for the application form, you'll require information on the categories that you're going to apply for. So there are two, which are capital costs for category 1 to 3 and professional fees for category 2 and 3. And you'll also need to ensure you have a quote for any cost that costs over 5,000. I know earlier Roisin spoke about your financial statement, and I know 1 or 2 questions have come in relation to this. So if you're for category 2 and 3 grantees, you need to provide a copy of your annual financial statement. And I know one of the questions in the chat was, can you submit a bridge statement? So bridge statements are shorter forms and don't include your income and expenditure statement. So I would ask that if you are a category 2 or 3 grantee, you submit your full financial statement, not just the bridge financial statement. And for category 1, applicants, if your organisation does not have an annual financial statement, you should submit your income and expenditure statement for the most recent financial year together with your balance sheet if it's available. Can we move to the next slide now, please? Now, you've submitted your application and you've been successful in your grant application. So I just sort of want to just briefly talk you through what the payment schedules and the returns are like. So if you're a category 1 grantee, you will receive a payment of 90% of the grant upon signing the agreement and returning the grant agreement to us and fulfilling any grant conditions that are set out. The final 10% is then paid retrospectively on the submission of an online financial return and narrative report. So an example of this would be, say you've been awarded a grant of €20,000. You will receive €18,000 upon signing of that grant agreement this year, and the balance of €2,000 will be paid to you on submission of your final expenditure return and narrative report either in 2023 or 2024. For category 2 and 3 grantees, 60% will be paid upon signing of the grant agreement and fulfilling the applicable conditions. The next 30% will be paid once you have spent 50% of the first instalment and the interim financial return is submitted. This interim financial return will be due early Q3 2023. And again, then the final 10% is paid retrospectively on submission of the final online financial return and narrative report. So an example of this is you're a category 2 grantee and you've been awarded 100,000. You will receive 60,000 this year on signing of the grant agreement. You will receive another 30,000 when you have spent 30,000 of the first 30,000 from the first 60 you got this year. And then the final 10,000 will be paid to you when the final return is submitted. For category 1 grantees, we plan to open the financial returns in 2023 to allow organisations that have completed the project before the 31st of January 2024 to submit the return and receive payment. For all other grantees, the final return will be required to be submitted in Q1 2024 after the end date of the programme 31st of January 2024. Please note, and this is something that I want you to really take note of, the final 10% is only paid to you after you have paid all the suppliers. So it is important that when you're planning your cash flow for this project that you ensure you have that 10% in place. These returns will be submitted via an online process, and this information will be provided at future information sessions to organisations. So I just want to say, we are here and will be here to support you through all aspects of the payments and returns process. So when we get to that, we will be there for you. So can we move on to the next slide? So this is my final slide, and I just want to talk to you about audit and verification. And now, as I said earlier, I'm a former auditor, and I spent a number of years auditing organisations. And I know that when people hear they're about to get an audit or a verification visit, it can create a sense of nervousness. But I hope to go through some aspects and through some steps that your organisation should be aware of that will help you put you at ease for this process. Verifications are part of this programme, and it's planned that they will be conducted in 2024 on a percentage from each of the grant categories. At this moment in time, it's planned for category 1 grants, it will be a desk-based visit will be conducted. So what does that mean? That means that you will have to submit the relevant documentation to Public via a secure online OneDrive system. For strand 2 and 3 grants, an on-site verification visit will be conducted. This is where an auditor will come to your premises and review your documentation. Grantees who are chosen for a verification process will be advised in advance, and you are allowed sufficient time to collect the required information and have it ready prior to either the desk or the on-site visit process commencing. So what does the process involve? It will include a review of the eligibility of the spend incurred to ensure that it agrees with what you put in your application form and what was agreed in your contract. It will ensure that you have a proper audit trail in place. So this will include that you have the bank statements in relation to the payment, you have the invoices from suppliers for the products and services you use, that you complied with public procurement requirements, and that your organisation has good governance controls. So in the past, with similar grant programs, there's been a number of common issues that have arisen that I just like to highlight to you at this stage that you need to that you should take steps so that you can take steps to address these so they don't arise for you. Firstly, make sure you keep all the relevant documentation on the grant. This includes the bank statements, invoices, procurement documentation, and any board or committee meeting minutes. Make sure you understand the public procurement requirements of the grant and that all relevant documentation is stored in one place that can be easily retrieved. Sometimes people leave your organisation or are away at the time of a verification visit, and the relevant documentation is not available. So ensure all grant information is stored at your premises where it can be accessed if you are chosen for a visit. The next thing you should be aware of is just be aware of conflict of interest that may arise. So what is a conflict of interest? So this could be where a member of the management committee or board is related to a builder or supplier in your community that you choose to use for the building project. If that arises in that instance, that member of the management committee or board should excuse themselves from the decision-making process, and that should be documented in the relevant meeting minutes of the committee or board. Another issue that does arise, and I spoke about it earlier, is in relation to organisations that are registered for VAT. If you are registered for VAT, please ensure you do not include the VAT elements of your payments in your expenditure returns, because if this is noted in a visit, it can lead to the VAT being deemed ineligible, which you'll have to refund. And my final bit of advice for you is that if you do hire a builder to complete your refurbishment or your extension or your work, a good bit of a practice is to put a contract in place. This is to protect your organisation, and it should clearly set out the responsibilities of both you and your builder. So thank you for your time, and now I'm going to pass you back to Catherine.
Thank you, Michael. And now I'm going to hand over to Roisin and Els for the Q&A session.
Okay, thanks very much, Catherine, for that. Myself and Roisin are just going to go some frequently asked questions that came up in the chat. But just before we do that, we'd just like to let everyone know about the clinics again. So Roisin, can you just take us through that for a couple of minutes?
Yeah, so we're going to have, as I mentioned there when I was talking about the application form, we're going to have online meetings that will be interactive, so you'll be able to unmute yourself and speak and ask questions of those, going through the online application form itself. So the dates for those are, I'll call them out now as well, but they are on the CCIF web page, and you'll be able to go back. So where you would have found the information for today and registered. And you'll be able to go back to that web page from Tuesday, the 7th of June, when the online application form is open, and register for whichever one of those meetings suits. So there'll be one at this time, a late afternoon one lunchtime one, and one evening one. So there's the 15th of June. Again, all this now is, I'll actually repost it in the chat, but the 15th of June will be the afternoon one. The 29th of June will be the evening one, and the 11th of July will be a lunchtime one. Also, just to remind everyone that there is an evaluation there, and that will be posted in the chat as well. And we really, really, really would value your opinion. We do look at these and take the feedback into consideration when we're planning future events. So please do take a couple of minutes to fill that in, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay.
I'm wondering now, is there anything else that we need?
No, thanks, Oisín.
Yeah.
I think it's probably just important to say that with those clinics, it won't be in the same format as the presentation that you received today. We will have breakaway rooms. You'll be able to move through the rooms. We'll have finance people there, eligibility people, building. So if you have any questions around plan information on building, we'll have a building person there. We will have online registration there. And so your very specific questions, you'll be able to go into the room, ask your very specific question, either stay and hear other people's questions or move into the next room, be that if you have a question on finance or registration or whatever. And so we would really encourage you to come to those clinics, especially if you have, if you're unsure about a specific question that relates to your community centre, or you're unsure about how to write something up in an application, you want more advice on that, because we will be there in rooms, and you'll be able to move freely through them. And then when you're finished, you can leave as needed. So we would encourage not just only yourselves, but also your committees or anyone else that is interested in attending. And that's why we've provided the one in Wednesday evening on the 29th from 7:30 to 9, and also the lunchtime one, so we can actually get as many people involved as possible. Okay, so in relation to the questions, we don't have a lot of time left. I think we only have about 12 minutes actually. I think a lot of them have been covered between the speakers today. If you feel that even after, we will do a frequently asked questions document. Each of these questions will be specifically answered, and we will put that on the DRCD website. We will also, if you feel that you still if you still have an additional query, you're still not clear, we would encourage you to come to the clinics or to contact via email, either online support at cobble.ie or CCIF or at DRCD. So just to cover off, there's three main areas that have been asked today around eligibility, around eligible costs, and then about registration. I'm going to just start with registration, because obviously you can't even fill in the application form if you haven't registered. So I'm not sure if Magella is still on the call.
Yes, I am.
Okay,
yep.
Great. So Magella, could you just quickly cover off what the time frame is for registration?
So you can register now, and you can register up to the 14th of July, technically, but you really need to register in the next few weeks because there's a review process, and you have to get your permissions, and then you have to go on and do your application form. So technically you can register up to the last minute, but obviously you need to give yourself plenty of time to do the application form. So as soon as you can, basically. And
do PAUs, or you are right about the acronyms, primary authorised users are simply the directors or the committee members within the community centres themselves.
Yep.
Do they need to be registered at CRO level?
If you're a company limited by guarantee, yes, they need to be listed on the CRO website, ideally, unless you're obviously in the middle of a change, and then that's fine. If you're an unincorporated organisation, as long as they're on your committee, and as long as you can confirm through your committee minutes that the primary authorised user has been agreed by the board to submit the application on your behalf, sign the contract, then that's all fine.
Now, I know there's a lot of questions around what we mean by incorporated and unincorporated, and we'll come to that in a moment. I'll just cover off registration first. So lastly, if you're the manager of the community centre, are you able to fill in all aspects of the application?
Yes.
And have access to all aspects of it?
Yes. So once you set the primary once the primary authorized user is set up, from Tuesday, they will be able to give anyone within the organization the CCIF application role, and that will allow anyone who has that role to create the application form in the first instance, to edit any part of it, and also to submit it.
Okay, great. So thanks very much for that, Angela.
No
and
problem.
So now back to Roisin around eligibility questions. But just before that, Roisin, there have been a number of questions around the availability of the slide deck and whether that could be made available to participants as well. You're on mute, Roisin.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me actually? Because a couple of people have said that my microphone was quite low. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, grand.
I hope everyone else
too
can.
Loud.
Oh, so it's probably just, yeah, okay,
so,
no problem.
yes, yeah. The slide
Okay.
deck from today and the recording from today will be available on that same webpage, the CCIF webpage, from after this presentation. If not today, it'll probably be tomorrow at some point.
And can we just clarify for people watching the difference between incorporated and unincorporated entities, please?
Yes. So an organization might be, say, a community group, it might be an association, but it might not be a registered company. So if you are registered with the company's registration office, the CRO, you got me here, then you are a company. That means you are incorporated. And the most common format of company used for community and voluntary sector organizations is a company limited by guarantee, CLG. That's why you hear that term used a lot. But what is a bit unique about this fund is that there is a category available, category 1, for organizations that are not incorporated. So even if you're not a company, you don't have a number from the CRO, you're not a CLG or any other type of company, then you can still apply under category 1, as long as you have a committee, a governing document of some type, usually that's a constitution or memorandum and articles of association, and a set of accounts of some type. So again, that doesn't necessarily need to be your audited annual financial statement. If that's not what you have, it might be a profit or loss account or something of that nature. So those are the 3 things: accounts, governing documents, and a committee.
Okay, thank you. I'm just conscious of time here, and I know that this
Yeah.
question or a variation of this question has come up a lot, so I do want to cover it off for people. And that is around the eligibility of outside the community centre costs, including an outside toilet or a field, an outdoor gym, a walking area, a car park. Are any of those costs eligible?
No, so this fund is quite specifically for the building, so the centre meaning the building. And of course, we acknowledge that there are lots of facilities that meet the definition in the sense of they're where people come and meet and gather and share all of the things that we talk about with the community centre. And those things might happen in an outdoor facility, or an outdoor facility might be used by a wide range of people in the community, absolutely. But for this fund, it is limited to works kind of within the building or attached to, but we're talking about the building. So.
Does that include a septic tank as well?
Oh,
okay, so as that's a sort of and I saw that come up a few times. So what we'll do is we will cover that off in the frequently asked questions. We'll also bring it up at the next clinic, just in case there are more than one applicant or one potential application for that, and we'll get you an answer on that one.
Sorry, Alice, just to say there's just 5 minutes left, Alan. So for maybe
no problem. No, all right. I will give you a couple of minutes to close off there, Catherine. So I'll just take one last question because it also came up quite a bit. say you apply for 300,000 grant, Roisin, can you actually get less? Like, could we sort of say, well, we won't give you 300, we'll give you 250, or would you advise people to apply for a different category, a lower category grant, or can they apply multiple times and cover the whole project off in stages?
Okay, so if the facility is not there to apply multiple times, so one organisation can apply for one grant. One organisation can apply for one grant for one centre only if it is in category 2 or 3. If it's category 1, one organisation can apply for one grant for improvements to multiple centres, as long as each of those individual centres meet the relevant criteria. In terms of being funded for less, so yes, when we talk about value for money being the criterion under which we look at the budget, and does it all make sense? Is it well justified? Is every cost supported and relevant to the programme and to the work itself and eligible? It may be the case that you submit various budget lines, but one of the items that you have submitted, that you've included in your application, might be ineligible for funding or not sufficiently supported by the evidence required that Michael spoke about, or not backed up by enough information to show that it is, to clearly show what it's for or that it's relevant to the project itself. So that might be a reason why a certain cost or number of costs might not be recommended for funding. But in general, your project is recommended for a proportion of what you seek. In terms of kind of saying stages, and 2 out of 3 stages might be funded. Again, it's up to the particular project to if that makes sense to do or not. So it's not so much that we would be looking at it in that way. We would be more looking at, does each cost, like I said, does it make sense and all of that. So it would depend on what makes the most sense for your project and how to lay it out. And if you generally put forward a proposed process for doing your project that is very logical and that makes it a more achievable project, then that is good, because you're being really clear, and it will also help with your score under achievability and viability.
Okay, thank you very much, Roisin. I'm afraid that's all we're going to be able to cover off at the session today. But as we have said earlier, we will answer everybody's question in the frequently answered document, which will be up in the next few days on the DRCD website. And also, if you still feel it's not exactly clear or you're not exactly confident in the response, then please come to the clinics where you will have the opportunity to talk one-on-one, or like it'll be a group, but you'll be able to present your question and get a very specific answer to it. And with that, I'm going to hand you back to Catherine.
Thanks very much, Az, and just to thank you all for attending the information session today. And as Az said there, this event has been recorded and it will be up on our website probably in the next couple of days. And also all the resources are there on the website as well. And if your query wasn't answered today, please send it to the ccif@drcd.gov.ie mailbox. Again, thank you all for giving your time this afternoon to attend the session.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.